Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Are you secretly a robot? Did an ancient Indian empire receive advanced technology from some strange visitors? And why were the Romans centuries ahead of everyone else when it came to medical technology? I'll be answering all of these questions for you right now and more, so grab a snack, be sure to subscribe, and let's go. Ancient aliens built this temple. The ancient people of India were far more advanced than modern science gives them credit for. I direct you to the Hoysala Temple, a structure almost 1,000 years old that seems to have been built with some seriously sophisticated tech. I'm not talking about hammers and chisels here. India has been home to some of the mightiest empires this world has ever seen. Let me know if any of these sound familiar. The Pandyas, the Cholas, the Pallavas, and the Vijayanagar. Even if you haven't heard of any of them, each one was a powerful empire that ruled for years, usually centuries at a time. Many of India's empires were on par with the Roman Empire. Between the 10th and the 14th centuries, the Hoysala Empire ruled Karnataka. They are renowned today for their phenomenal architecture, and there isn't a better example of it than at the Hoysala Temple. The pillars of this temple might be made of stone, but the markings on the surface look like they were made with a modern technique called turning. Experts say it seems impossible that the ancient architects could have achieved such results with manual tools. The detailing is so fine they would have needed motorized tools. The key word here is motorized. How is that possible? If history has told us anything, it's that there definitely weren't motorized tools 900 years ago around the time the temple was built. Things get even weirder, though, when you start looking closely at the reliefs and statues carved into the stone walls and pillars. Take, for example, the figure of a Hindu god holding what sort of looks like a gear in their hand. It's an object with two sets of concentric circles and little gear teeth on each circle. The outer circle has 32 spokes on it, and the inner circle has 16. That matches properly with what you would expect to see on a machine gear. Also, the gears, assuming they are gears, are fastened together with a kind of chain lock that is still used today. This object looks like a part in a modern machine, there's no doubt about it. There is even another carved god on a temple wall that is holding in their left hand what looks like the head of a rotary drill. Either it's a rotary drill or it's a pine cone, and if you're a fan of the channel, you know it could be a pine cone. Though I must admit, when compared to a rotary drill, the similarities are uncanny. The object looks like the kind of drill that modern sculptors would use for building this type of marvel. You think it's over, but it's not. I've saved the weirdest part of the temple for last. The most unbelievable, ridiculous, no way it's true part. There are carved figurines that look like astronauts. They're impossible to miss. These strange figures have unmistakable astronaut helmets on. They're wearing big, bulky astronaut gloves. They're bare-legged, which probably isn't the best space attire, but they do look like they have space helmets on. Maybe they're bare-legged because they never went to space. Maybe these people were gifted pieces of spacesuits from their extraterrestrial friends. After all, space travel is mentioned repeatedly in the Hindu holy scriptures. It was said that their gods traveled through space in miraculous vehicles known as vimanas. Ancient astronaut theorists have interpreted the Hindu texts as saying the ancient cultures of India knew about aliens and UFOs and incorporated this into their mythology and religion. Could the Hoysala Empire have been exposed to travelers from another planet? Travelers who gifted them some small piece of technology? I want to read your opinions in the comments. Mystic pyramids. There are about 120 pyramids in Egypt, which sounds like a lot, right? Until you realize there are roughly 200 pyramids in Sudan, 300 in China, and more than 1,000 in Central America. Everywhere you look in the ancient world, there are pyramids. The Borobudur Temple in Java, the Jebel Barkal Pyramid in Sudan, the ziggurat of Tepe Sialk in Iran, and the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico. But what if there is more going on with these giant stone triangles than meets the eye? A Ukrainian physicist who spent more than a decade researching pyramids thinks they may have had a greater purpose. He recently built his own replica pyramid and made some shocking discoveries. His name is Alexander Golod, and he has built over 17 fiberglass pyramids across Russia and the former Soviet Union, the tallest being 132 feet. Alexander has been hard at work testing changes in the environment near the places where he built the pyramids. Through what he's seen, Alexander believes pyramids are somehow able to focus energy to offer incredible benefits. The doctor found that the immune system of organisms improved when they were near the pyramid. Tissue regenerated faster. Seeds stored in the pyramid showed an increase in yields. The ozone above the area slightly improved. Seismic activity was reduced, and violent weather was also reduced. Alexander claimed the medicine is more effective, radioactivity is less, and impotence can be cured. Every man over 60 is about to have a pyramid in their backyard. Alexander also experimented on prisoners, feeding them food that was stored in one of the pyramids. The prisoners that ate the pyramid food were significantly less violent than the others. Alexander's work is evidence enough to make a case claiming that ancient pyramids were a lot more than just funerary monuments. Pyramids may have been much more than that, somehow able to tap into some sort of mystical energy. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Treasure from the Cave of Skulls. There is a terrifying place in Israel called the Cave of Skulls. You can probably guess how it got its name. Archaeologists found a whole bunch of skulls in it, and now they have found something even more exciting. Hundreds of pieces of ancient technology. The Cave of Bones is located in the Judean desert and has been excavated on and off since the 1960s. Because of its dry, dusty conditions, researchers have been able to find numerous organic artifacts within. Organic pieces of the past are hard to find because they decay so rapidly. Things like wood, skin, and textiles almost never survive over the years. Archaeologists found 430 textiles inside this one desert cave. Most of the textiles date to the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century, which was a war between the local Jewish population and the Roman conquerors. But there are other textiles from the Chalcolithic period, which began 6,500 years ago. One of the textile fragments stood out to researchers because of its bright red dye. Scientists use a technique known as high-pressure liquid chromatography to study the fragment and analyze the chemical composition of its dye. Researchers were shocked when they identified the chemical marker for Kermes vermilio. That likely doesn't mean much to you, so let me explain. Kermes vermilio is a bug, an insect that lives in oak trees. The chemical marker demonstrates the use of insect dye during the Bronze Age. This is the oldest known piece of fabric dyed using an insect as coloring. People have been using red dye throughout history, but normally red dyes were derived from plants or different animals. Red dye from the Kermes vermilio is incredibly rare because collecting them is a time-consuming nightmare. Each insect yields a tiny amount of dye, but that was part of what made their red coloring so rare and valuable. The broader implication of this discovery is that ancient people in Israel had an incredible understanding of dyeing techniques. It might seem like a no-brainer to use an insect for dye, but it wasn't common knowledge in the Bronze Age. The fact that someone in Israel figured out how to do it shows the complex nature of these mysterious people and their technologies. And now for number 7, but first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Brooke Breitenbach, who is a long-term subscriber, and Kai Winter for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. Ancient hot springs. Roman baths had the ability to heal you of your disease and your sickness. At least that's what the legends have said for more than 1,000 years. People were miraculously healed in the mystical waters of Roman baths. Modern scientists have always said those legends are nonsense. Well, they were wrong. A new study has proven that the water used in the ancient Roman baths in England did have incredible healing properties. Scientists thought it was all just talk, but it was the scientists who didn't know what they were talking about. The Romans did have access to blessed waters that treated medical conditions. It goes to show that so much of what the ancient people believed in, from healing waters to miracles, was real. When the Romans arrived in Bath, England, a city literally named after the Roman baths, they found some hot springs. This was just shy of 2,000 years ago in England's southwest region, not far from Stonehenge. The water oozing up through the crust of the Earth is heated by the planet's core, allowing it to maintain a balmy temperature all year long. It's a natural hot tub that doesn't cost any money to keep hot. Sign me up! I want one of these in my backyard. The Romans were so impressed that they built Temple Sulis Minerva around 2 of the springs and turned them into lavish bathhouses. One of the springs is called the King's Spring, with a consistent temperature of 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The other is the Great Bath, which is slightly cooler at only 86 degrees Fahrenheit. These days, the springs are still tourist attractions. In 2023 alone, over 1 million people visited them. But the thing is, you don't get the full Roman experience these days. Nobody has been allowed in the water for years. In the past, people bathed in the water for thousands of years. Only now has it become prohibited. People washed in it, drank it, and they use it to heal. Even in the Victorian era, people traveled from across England to savor the curative properties of the ancient Roman baths. One of the most famous stories of the bath's healing abilities is the one of Prince Bladud, who was the father of King Lear. Although keep in mind that Prince Bladud and King Lear may have never existed. Prince Bladud is the less famous King Arthur, another legendary king of the Britons whose story appeared first in the year 1136. Bladud's earliest mention is in a book written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who was the same man who first mentioned King Arthur. Lo and behold, Bladud and Arthur were mentioned for the first time in the same book. I digress, but that's because you need the full story, and once King Arthur is mentioned, I just can't not talk about him. Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote a book called The History of the Kings of Britain. Up until a few decades ago, the book had been taken as an accurate historical account of the kings of the Britons for the last 2,000 years. The book starts with the Trojans founding the Britons after the legendary war between them and the Macedonians. Geoffrey's book continues through the ages until the Anglo-Saxons took control of Britain. It's from the pages of the book that the legend of King Arthur was born, and the legend of King Lear, and the legend of Prince Bladud. Most historians today accept that the book was a total fantasy. Many scholars say that few characters in it had ever existed, including Arthur. Anyway, Prince Bladud grew extremely ill during his extensive travels. I'll come right out and say it. He had leprosy. But when he went to the Roman baths in the city of Bath, the water miraculously cured him. Free of leprosy, Bladud went on to become the 9th king of the Britons. The fable sounds silly, but scientists now have evidence that it's scientifically plausible. A team of researchers identified 300 types of bacteria in the water of the hot springs, including bacteria known for its antibiotic production, and bacteria with inhibition against human pathogens. Scientists identified microbes that essentially fight things like E. coli, staph infections, and other bacteria that can cause severe diarrhea. I don't know how much you're aware of what medical ailments plagued people in ancient times, but diarrhea was a big one. People were always eating things they shouldn't, resulting in diarrhea that was sometimes fatal. If there was a pool a person could swim in to cure their diarrhea, it would have been a big deal. It makes sense that the Romans saw the effectiveness of the water and built a bathhouse around the springs. Scientist Lee Hutt, the author of the new study, said the microorganisms present in Roman baths are a potential source of new antimicrobials. The healing properties of the water are so strong that scientists may be able to use it to make new, more powerful antibiotics. Earthquake-proof walls. Now let's investigate the anti-seismic megalithic walls of the ancient world. Egypt, Peru, Easter Island. There are ruins across this world that seem to defy explanation. Giant stone walls built by advanced cultures who somehow figured out how to protect themselves from earthquakes. How did they do it? And how did so many civilizations that supposedly never met figure out the exact same technology? By far, one of the most impressive examples of anti-seismic walls comes from Ahu-Vinapu on Easter Island. The surviving wall here is so solid, its engineering so similar to walls in Peru, that many believe the Rapa Nui had been in contact with the Inca. It's hard to imagine what Ahu-Vinapu looked like when it was first built because the archaeological site is in ruins right now. I don't even know what I'm going to show you behind me. Most of the walls are destroyed and the monuments obliterated. When first built, though, it was huge, covering a massive land area. It was most likely covered in gigantic statues and temples. Researchers think it was the main ceremonial center for the whole island, a place where the Rapa Nui gathered to hold ceremonies and partake in rituals. However, keep in mind that's only a guess. Even the descendants of the ancient Rapa Nui don't know what the Ahu Vinapu was for. The devastation of their culture with the arrival of Europeans led to the loss of most of their history. Their descendants have historical amnesia. In 1958, American archaeologist William Malloy became the first one to seriously study Ahu Vinapu. It was determined that the megalithic stone wall faces the sunrise during the winter solstice. Perhaps that had something to do with the site's original purpose. The stone masonry at Ahu Vinapu is extraordinary, with the old ruins made of gigantic slabs of basalt carefully fitted together. It really is flawless, which you can see in pictures, but can appreciate much more in real life. Researcher Thor Heyerdahl noticed the similarities between Ahu Vinapu and Sacsayhuaman. He suggested the incredible technology used to build the walls on Easter Island came from mainland Peru. This isn't what you would call a conspiracy theory because there's nothing conspiratorial about it. Researchers know that across Polynesia, this level of engineering doesn't exist. The expertise used to build Ahu Vinapu doesn't appear on other Polynesian islands. The logical explanation is that the Inca Empire coexisted with the Easter Island Empire in the 16th century. There are even old folk legends to confirm it. The old tales are about a wave of Inca settlers who arrived on Easter Island and caused some drama. The first people on Easter Island were Polynesians known as Hanau Momoko. The second wave of settlers were called the Hanau Eepe. Researcher William Thompson learned in 1886 that Ahu Vinapu was built by the Hanau Eepe, the people who supposedly came from Peru. Everything tracks and makes complete sense. It all makes sense to me. There is no reason the world wasn't more connected than we seem to think. Incredible Roman surgeons. State-of-the-art isn't a phrase you typically hear in the same sentence as Roman surgeons, but a recently discovered set of medical instruments has shaken things up. These instruments are indeed state-of-the-art. They are highly sophisticated surgical tools that don't make sense existing in the days of Rome. Roman doctors were brilliant. They had weird ideas, sure, but they were mostly adept at treating ailments of the human body. Scientists have known that Roman medicine was advanced for a very long time, but nobody had imagined it was this advanced. At an ancient archaeological site in Walbrook River, London, researchers dug up a series of instruments from 2,000 years ago. Professor Rebecca Fleming studied the tools as part of her research in ancient medicine and forgotten healing practices. The design and workmanship of the tools is more than just impressive. Scientists used a CT scanner to peer underneath the surface of the objects. They looked at a bronze scalpel handle that would have been used in surgeries. They examined 2 surgical probes, a spoon, and a pair of needles. All of this was done inside the safety of the University of Exeter's Shard 3D lab. Most of the instruments in the kit make sense. There was a spoon, likely used for mixing medications. The needles were used for sewing bandages. The probe was likely used for examining wounds and fractures before surgery, and also for cleaning wax from ears. The most spectacular piece in the kit is the scalpel handle. Professor Fleming said the craftsman devoted intense attention to crafting the socket where the iron scalpel blade was inserted into the handle. The implement was designed in such a way to make it easy for the surgeon to replace the blades when they were worn. They don't even do that with things they make today. Even though only the bronze handle survives, there are medical texts in Greek and Roman that describe the implement being used. It was likely an important tool in surgeries and bloodletting. But where did the Romans come up with all of their advanced ideas? That's the real mystery here. Professor Fleming said the Romans spread their surgical instruments across their territories from Britain to Syria. In other words, people didn't have these kinds of advanced surgical instruments until the Romans came along. What made the Romans such genius inventors? Any ideas? Let me know in the comments. The alien genius of Da Vinci. Speaking of genius inventors, I can't talk about ancient technology without at least mentioning the man himself, Leonardo da Vinci. But did you know that Leonardo may have invented a machine that could explain the enigma of stone megaliths across the globe? The machine is known as the column hoist. Leonardo da Vinci took a machine for hoisting columns that was created by engineer Francesco di Giorgio and improved it. The mechanism is very clever. It takes only one person to lift a humongous stone column into place. The mechanism is powered with nothing but human muscle. It's a huge tripod with a crank and worm screw attached to the top. The crank twists the screw, which is attached to the stone column. As the worm screw is raised, the column goes up with it. The machine uses the physics of the worm screw to raise heavy objects with relative ease. It may have taken a while, but it still worked. One person could have lifted a gigantic stone slab that would have otherwise been impossible to move, all thanks to a crank and a spindle. Isn't physics fun? The column hoist was even attached to wheels, meaning that someone could push it around a building site on their own. Just take a look at this image from the Da Vinci Machines and Robotics exhibition that was held in Las Vegas in 2022. Pretty cool, right? The truly impressive part is that it's a one-man machine. Leonardo da Vinci was the master of simplicity. Another genius invention was the tongs. A huge metal pair of tongs, just like you have hanging off your barbecue, was suspended from a large wooden hanger by a rope. The genius thing about the tongs is that the heavier the object, the more secure the hold. The tongs use the weight of the object and gravity to clinch it tightly. This invention was perfect for maneuvering blocks weighing several tons, again only using maybe 1 or 2 people. Here's a picture of the tongs from the same exhibition. I could go on and on about Leonardo da Vinci until the cows come home. He also revolutionized the arched bridge around 1485. His portable design for a self-supported bridge changed warfare. The bridge relied on gravity and its own weight to remain solid. Soldiers could assemble it across a river, move their army to the other side, and then disassemble it before the enemy came. Leonardo invented the night clock, a simple candle that showed what time it was when you woke up in the middle of the dark. It worked using wax, temperature, and humidity. Then there was the anemometer, which Leonardo da Vinci invented for measuring wind speed. Wind struck a metal plate hanging on a hinge, pushing it backwards. The harder the velocity, the higher the plate would be pushed. Simple, but again, effective. He even made a flying machine known as the aerial screw in 1489. Some people believe it was the original helicopter. The aerial screw was like a drone made from pieces of linen, some wooden rods, and a spring-powered launch mechanism. It's unclear if Leonardo ever got it to fly, but modern scientists think it could have. With a strong enough motor, the machine would have definitely gotten itself airborne. Megalithic madness. On the outskirts of the ancient Inca capital of Cusco is the very definition of megalithic. What you see in the ruins of Sacsayhuaman brings to mind images of advanced technology from a lost world. The walls here are incredible, standing at an altitude of more than 12,000 feet. To the Inca, Sacsayhuaman was like their Garden of Eden. They believed Sacsayhuaman was the dwelling place of the very first Inca, named Manco Capac. He was their Adam. Mainstream archaeologists pinpoint the construction of Sacsayhuaman to between 1438 and 1500. Construction began during the rule of Emperor Pachacuti as a ceremonial center for Inti, god of the sun. Rituals would have been held here with festivities unfolding inside the monumental walls. It's those walls that I'm here to tell you about. It's the walls of Sacsayhuaman that are connected to the walls of Ahu-Vinapu on Easter Island. Both walls display an impossible amount of precision engineering. Which piece of data do I start with to blow your socks off? I'll start with the fact that there isn't just one wall, but 3. The Inca protected the sun god's sanctuary with a trio of gigantic defensive barricades 900 feet long. The main wall at the front has stones up to a staggering 15 feet tall and between 90 and 120 tons. You couldn't move these boulders with an army of elephants. It just doesn't make any sense that humans move them with what, their hands and some ropes? It makes even less sense when you look at the site from above. Aerial photographs of Sacsayhuaman show that the system of walls looks like a snake. The way they slither in a serpentine pattern is reminiscent of a giant serpent. Mainstream archaeologists say it was supposed to resemble the jaws of a puma, but from the sky, the walls look much more reptilian. To achieve such a design without being able to physically see how it would turn out from above, it's mind-blowing. It's actually possible that the Inca didn't even build the walls. There is a theory that the walls were already there before the Inca arrived. In the ruins of Sacsayhuaman, researchers have found pottery from the Quilque culture, which thrived in the Andes long before the Inca even existed. Experts believe the Quilque culture built the walls of Sacsayhuaman 400 years before the Inca. Other experts think the walls were already on the mountaintop when the Quilque culture arrived. The walls could be remnants of a civilization that predates every known civilization civilization in Peru by thousands of years. This more extreme theory could explain why nowhere else does this level of engineering exist in the world, except for in other places where an antediluvian civilization may have thrived. Places like Easter Island and Egypt, where the impressive stonework and ancient monuments are just as baffling. Let me know your theories in the comments. We are all AI. I hate to be the one to break it to you, but you, my friend, are an AI. There is a scary theory out there that is a little unsettling that says that humanity is an ancient artificial intelligence. Scientists are looking into the possibility that humanity could be an ancient form of AI. The theory suggests that you and I are not just biological entities. You, me, and every human who has ever lived is the result of a sophisticated AI program that began centuries ago. No, not centuries, eons. Humans might have been created as a sophisticated biological AI, and now we are undergoing a process of self-learning and rapid evolution. If you've ever seen the show The 100, this seems kind of similar to the Spirit of the Commander, which was an artificial intelligence that resided in a neural implant in the leaders. Whoever had the chip became the commander and had advanced knowledge. Anywho, in the past couple of years, the world has seen how rapidly artificial intelligence can evolve. Machines are learning, adapting, and getting more creative by the day. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that our species began as a simple version of AI implanted in a monkey's brain. It could explain why there was a sudden leap from being primitive Homo sapiens to conquering humans. Professor Anil Seth from the University of Sussex said consciousness is difficult to define. Each person has their own consciousness, which contains within it the world, themselves, and everything that they know. What scientists can't figure out is how a person's consciousness is created. Philosophers have been puzzling over it since the days of ancient Greece, and modern scientists don't have a clue how consciousness works. Biologically, humans exhibit a startling number of machine characteristics. Our bodies work just like complex machinery, with our cells acting as small processors. Our DNA is nothing more than a database for information. Our biological machinery can even function independently, much like a self-sustaining system of artificial intelligence. But what about the ancient world? It's true that out of nowhere, humans went from living in caves and chasing deer to suddenly building monumental structures and establishing civilization. Maybe that was the AI in our brains hitting its stride after hundreds of thousands of years. Any ideas? The Skywells of ancient China. If you lived in ancient China, you didn't need to worry about your energy bill during the extreme heat of summer. In the centuries before air conditioning, the Chinese developed an ingenious solution to keep their homes cool. They came up with the idea for skywells. Almost nobody has a skywell these days in China. You can only find them in really old houses, usually made from timber, tucked away in rural villages. Most people live under the oppressive concrete of modern urbanism. They live in apartment blocks and huge towers like self-contained cities. But just what is a skywell? It's like a well, only it goes to the sky. Or maybe a more accurate description would be a skylight without the glass and with more walls. A skywell is at the center of a house. A hole in the ceiling goes down to the floor level and is blocked on 3 sides, leaving one wall for air to easily flow through. It's similar to a chimney in its structure, only way bigger. Having a hole in the ceiling and an enclosed chute to focus the air creates natural air conditioning. The Chinese started implementing skywells during the Ming Dynasty around 1368. They remained part of traditional homes in the hottest parts of China up until the end of the Qing Dynasty in 1911. It's been over the last century that traditional homes have been replaced with modern buildings. You might be thinking, oh geez, how effective could a hole in the ceiling be at cooling down a house? It's amazingly effective. Effective enough that people living in a house with a skywell might survive an apocalyptic heat wave when their neighbors are roasting. Studies have shown that a house with a skywell will have an internal temperature of 40 degrees Fahrenheit lower than outside. That could mean the difference between life and death in temperatures that threaten the human body. Even with the prevalence of air conditioning, what happens if the power goes out? It's genius technologies like these that are going to be all the rage after Armageddon. It's a shame that such brilliant inventions are being forgotten by modern minds and replaced with technology. What other ancient technology should we pay more attention to? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
The Chanquillo Observatory Complex. The Chanquillo Observatory Complex in Peru features a whopping 13 stone towers. These towers were built between 250 and 200 BC just over 2,000 years ago. They are considered an advanced ancient technology because these stone towers functioned as a calendar, marking the rise and fall of the sun during different times of the year. It's actually considered the oldest solar observatory anywhere in the Americas. Scientists have called it a masterpiece of human creative genius, and yet despite its amazing stature and serious historical relevance, pretty much nobody has heard of it. The site wasn't even added to the list of global cultural monuments until 2021. These days, the towers don't exactly look like towers. They look more like the bumpy bones of some great dragon's spine crawling up a ridge, which also looks somewhat like the back of a sleeping dragon. They've crumbled and fallen quite a bit since ancient times, now just small shrunken remnants of what they once were. Still, the foundations are there, and if you use your imagination, you can see just how splendid they would have been 2,300 years ago. They functioned as a calendar by marking the equinoxes and solstices, while also keeping track of the exact time of year within 1 or 2 days. Unlike places like Stonehenge, Chanquillo was created on a huge scale. Stonehenge and other ancient observatories used circles and big blocks of stone as calendars. But this ancient civilization, now called the Chanquillo Society, took it a step further and used imposing towers and a much larger space. It was something that took great knowledge of both the cosmos and mathematics. The hydraulic telegraph. According to the ancient Greek historian Polybius, a man named Aeneas Tacticus invented the hydraulic telegraph over 2,000 years ago in 350 BC. It was the first long-distance communication system, originally employed during the First Punic War to send messages from Sicily to Carthage. It was a pretty ingenious invention, and arguably the most efficient way to get a message from one place to another in a hurry. The system worked like this. On the top of separate hills, there would be a container filled with water and a vertical rod floating inside it. The rod was inscribed with various codes. In order to send a message, the operator would use a torch to signal the receiver on another hill within view. Once the two were synchronized, they would begin draining their buckets at the exact same time. They would stop draining their buckets as soon as the sender lowered their torch. Then, wherever the water level was, that was the message. The issue here is that the hydraulic telegraph could only be used on days of good weather, and when the sender and receiver were within sight of each other. They could also only have so many predetermined messages already written on the vertical rod. Still, it was a genius invention that didn't see any improvements until the 19th century in Britain, nearly 2,200 years later. The surgeon's tomb. In Peru, the highly advanced yet oddly terrifying surgical kit of an ancient doctor was discovered inside a tomb. The doctor's surgical kit contained what at first glance looked like primitive weapons, knives and needles and sharp metallic tools. The truth is that many of these surgical instruments played two roles, being used in medical surgeries and in human sacrifices. But perhaps the most boggling part is that the surgeon almost certainly used these tools and his advanced knowledge of surgical techniques to perform operations on people's brains. The surgeon lived 1,000 years ago during what is known as the Middle Sican period of between 900 and 1050. He was buried underneath the ceremonial temple at the Huaca Las Ventanas archaeological site, which goes to show he had a very high standing in the community. He was part of the Sican culture, also known as the Lambayeque culture, and although some might consider them primitive barbarians for the way they sacrificed their own people, they were also extremely advanced when it came to medical science. According to the director of the Sican National Museum, Carlos Helera, along with surgical knives and other instruments, archaeologists also found 2 frontal bones with marks on them. These marks indicate that they were cut using trepanation techniques. In other words, the frontal bones were trophies from human skull surgery. Carlos says this likely means the surgeon was an expert in cranial trepanations, using his knives to cut into people's skulls and relieve pressure on their brains. Pont Dugard. During the Roman Empire, aqueducts went up all across Europe. They were used to transport the most important liquid on the planet from one point to another. It took a lot of engineering prowess to design the aqueducts, bringing drinkable water to cities that otherwise wouldn't have had any access. The aqueduct was one of the big things, along with major highways, responsible for the success of the Roman Empire. And there is no greater example of the architectural genius of the aqueduct than Pont Dugard in France. Today, Pont Dugard is the best preserved aqueduct anywhere in Europe. It was designed to supply running water for everything from drinking to cooking to waste disposal to the city of Nemesis 2,000 years ago. It's extraordinary because it's still standing and because it's massive. The structure stands over 150 feet tall. It's over 1,500 feet wide, and it's in better shape than some bridges built in the 20th century. It doesn't seem like anything will topple this unbelievable feat of engineering. Not even the millions of tourists who climb all over it every year. Roman Nanotech. Even more impressive than the greatness of the Roman aqueducts is Roman nanotechnology. That's right, nanotechnology. Recent evidence has come to light that Roman craftsmen figured out how to use nanotech to change the color of things when exposed to different light. The evidence comes in the form of a goblet, what's called the Lycurgus cup. It looks like an ordinary glass drinking cup, but it's unique in the fact that it uses microscopic technology to change its exterior color. The unique properties were first noticed when it was brought to a museum over 70 years ago. But it wasn't until recently that scientists were able to actually figure out how the color changes. First of all, the goblet was made 1,600 years ago. The process behind its creation is incredibly complex. Tiny particles of gold and silver were embedded inside the glass. When it's sitting in normal lighting, the glass is a jade color, but when it's lit from behind, the green turns to a ruby red. It does this because when hit by light from behind, photons hit the electrons and cause them to vibrate, thereby changing the color. It's doubtful the Romans realized they were working with nanotechnology. However, they clearly knew they were onto something. The Romans probably ground metal particles and then mixed them with hot liquid glass to create the cup. And although they knew the result, they probably didn't understand why. Otherwise, there would be a lot more surviving examples of this sort of nanotechnology. The Viking sword of the future. The mysterious Ulfberht swords of the Vikings were created using technology from the future. In fact, these ancient weapons have boggled archaeologists for years, with experts confused as to how medieval Vikings made them. The issue is that Vikings forged these swords using technology that didn't appear for another 1,000 years after they were gone. The swords all date between the 9th and 11th centuries, forged during a transitional period between primitive Viking weaponry and the more advanced swords used by medieval knights. Thousands of them were dispersed across Europe, though only around 100 are preserved today, most of them pulled from Viking burials. Even more mysterious is that after 1100 AD, the swords vanished, and nothing with even a remotely similar quality surfaced again until the 18th century. All the swords were inscribed with the name Ulfberht, which archaeologists think was a kind of ancient brand name. However, nobody can agree on if this was the name of the place the weapons were made or the name of the person who came up with the technology. Now let's look at why they were so special. The metal of the blades has been compared in strength and quality to modern-day steel. Before the appearance of these swords, Viking blades were made of low-quality steel that shattered like glass. Then, from out of nowhere, swords of the same quality as modern 21st century steel suddenly appeared. It's strange because blacksmiths shouldn't even have had the technology to heat the iron ore enough to create such magnificent steel. They would have needed ovens heated to over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. How do you think they did this? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Bronze Age superthread. People in the Bronze Age figured out how to make superthread, a highly advanced thread used in fashioning everything from clothing to building materials. 3,800 years ago, in both Britain and across Europe, thread making became abruptly popular. It was a huge technological leap forward, moving from the primitive draft spinning of plant fibers to a process called splicing. According to Dr. Margarita Gleba from the McDonald Institute for Archaeological Research, the invention of splicing marked a major turning point in civilization. Even more interesting is that a new study has shown that it wasn't only the pre-dynastic Egyptians who figured out how to make perfect textiles, but also Bronze Age Europeans. Here's why it was such a huge step forward for civilization. Draft spinning, which was a process of drawing out fibers from a mass and then twisting them using a rotating spindle, occurred at the exact same time as the first human urbanization and the first real population growths happened. It also coincided directly with major human migration across the Mediterranean region. Learning how to create strong textiles allowed for faster and bigger ships, and for the quicker processing of materials. It was one of the first real technologies that allowed humans to go further than they ever had before. Technology spreads disease. The discovery of a parasitic egg inside of a grave 6,200 years old has proven something a little strange. The parasitic egg is direct evidence of an unintended side effect of the first agricultural irrigation systems in the Middle East. It would appear that with the birth of irrigation in Syria over 6,000 years ago, ancient people managed to inadvertently spread disease with more effectiveness than ever before. The parasitic egg would have eventually hatched into a flatworm parasite, something that lives in the blood vessels inside the bladder and intestines. People infected with this kind of parasite suffer from a disease called schistosomiasis. It causes all kinds of nasty issues from bladder cancer to kidney failure. But up until the introduction of crop irrigation in ancient Mesopotamia, it wasn't a very big issue. Man-made technology was responsible for the first major disease outbreaks. According to Dr. Pierce Mitchell from the University of Cambridge, whoever contracted the parasite had done so through the use of irrigation systems. Before 7,500 years ago, the parasite was restricted to living its early life inside freshwater snails, and then attaching onto people who went swimming in the water. The parasite would burrow into the skin and then cause the disease, but the irrigation systems distributed the water to crops, which were then distributed to the masses, giving the parasites 1,000 new avenues of infection. They could now infect people without having to wait for them to go swimming. They were distributed by the irrigation system to everyone with a vengeance. The ancient Maya road system. One of the greatest technologies implemented by the Maya people was a system of highways that linked their great empire together. These roads were called sakbe, and they were quite a bit different from the roads being paved in ancient Rome. The Maya roads were made of huge stones overlaid with rubble, and over top of the rubble were cylindrical stones and smooth layers of stucco. This created actual highways, wide stretches of primitive pavement about 4 feet above ground level. In some parts of the swampy empire, the roads could be as tall as 8 feet to get over the marshy terrain. One of the biggest issues when trying to determine just how vast the Maya road system was is that pretty much all of it is gone. 1,100 years later, these same wild jungles that have swallowed most of the Maya ruins have also swallowed their technologically advanced roadways. So far, the longest one discovered stretches a distance of 60 miles from between Koba and Yashuna, but historians think some of the longer ones were at least 100 miles in length. And while that may not seem like a lot, it's pretty big. Keep in mind that the Maya civilization itself covered an area of 325,000 square miles. They used these raised roads to connect ceremonial centers with rural communities and major cities with each other. It allowed people to move through treacherous jungle terrain far more easily, which helped with everything from trade to warfare. The Dendera Light. The Dendera Light is either the first evidence of a light bulb being used in Egypt, or just a really coincidental artistic rendering of a mythical snake in a womb. The light isn't a physical artifact, but a stone relief at the Hathor Temple, which itself is located in the temple complex of Dendera. The depiction shows what appears to be a very long electric bulb with a wire in it and a filament, being wielded by an unknown pharaoh or a servant. It's hard to say. The light bulb, which looks like a modern cathode ray tube, also appears to be connected via a long wire to a battery. At first glance, it really does look like a light bulb. Fringe researchers claim it proves that the Egyptians figured out how to create a light bulb thousands of years before anyone else. The truth might be a little less exciting. Egyptologists believe it's all just a coincidence. They say the snake inside the light bulb is actually the serpent god Sematawi. He is rising from a lotus flower, which appears to be the base of the bulb. The flower's stalk is what's supposedly a wire connected to a power source. But as for the bulb around the snake, that's just supposed to represent Nut's womb. Nut is the goddess of night. With all these things put together, the relief is really just a depiction of the rising sun conquering night via the snake god rising through the lotus and being born from the night goddess's womb. It's a mouthful and probably the most convoluted way to draw a sunrise, but that's the ancient Egyptians for ya. Either they invented the light bulb, of which no physical proof has ever been found, or they just really liked complicated reliefs on their temple walls. Thanks for watching! Which of these incredible ancient technologies do you feel was the most advanced for its time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to hit that subscribe button for more videos like these. See you soon! Bye!